Hare Krishna, Hare. Oh, you did it once. Oh, I didn't even notice. That's how things started.
That's a melody by George Harrison.
Or, as Prabhupada called him, Harry's son.
Harry's son. Yeah. And the song, the name of the song is "Isn't It a Pity?" Beautiful song.
Number one album in 1970. Hmm? Number one.
Yeah.
Worst album 1970, Grand Funk Railroad.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yeah, that's a song. Bob Dylan. One more cup of
That's
coffee.
cool, buddy. I
One
like
more
that
cup
one.
of coffee.
But that progression is very, very old.
What did he
I'm
write
sure there's a
then?
lot of other songs with that note prior to his doing this, but the way he did it was pretty spectacular.
When did you write that?
Early 70s. 74.
Never heard that.
74. So I tried to fit them melodies into Kirtans. People are familiar with them. Who's next?
Rita.
The song I was singing when you did it. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna
You wanna sing?
So just like to put you all at ease, I stopped testing negative, but like I'm still under the weather, so like I just can't really.
Okay.
Falling. Yeah.
How do you fix it? Fix that as well. Haribol. Are you leaving, Maria?
Yeah, I have to go to sleep.
Okay, take me to the box.
Where did you learn to play the mardana?
We just took a course with somebody and they like recorded it and it's on for selling movies.
On Udemy?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And send it over.
Yes. Thank you. I want to learn how to play the mardana really bad, especially after the 24-hour Kirtan. I walked away like, why don't I know how to play the Kirtan?
Yeah. Did you post something in your group here about Mardana lessons?
I didn't know.
Some of you did.
Oh.
Yeah.
your heart, everybody. Louder. Krishna Everybody, hands up in the air. Call out the holy name. Hare Krishna. With your heart. Hare Krishna. Krishna call out the holy name. Hare Shik wants to sing this.
Really? You want to sing your favorite?
You go ahead.
Morning machine. Namaste Narasrinaya.
Namaste Narasrinaya.
Hiranyakashipo Vakshaha.
Hiranyakashipo Vakshaha.
Shiratankarakarai.
Shiratankarakarai.
Om Rishinho Bharato Rishinho. Yato yato yamita do Rishinho. Rishinho Inai Rishinho. Vishingamadim Saranam Brahmani. Savakara Kamaravare Naka Avutasena Kalita Hiranyakashipo Janupingam Vishavakita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadish Hare
So now we are going to start our heart-to-heart session, and our guest who will interview today is Devananda Prabhu. Who maybe ask you to please come over here. And Sheikh Prabhu is going to interview Devananda Prabhu.
The mic?
We'll have both mics.
Yeah, but we gotta be careful it doesn't face the speaker.
And first few questions Sheikh Prabhu will ask, and then we'll open up for the audience to ask any questions you want. We have time for 20 minutes, and beyond that we can continue the discussion during the Prashana. So, welcome and begin our heart-to-heart conversation.
January 30th hearings.
What's that?
January 30th hearings.
No, let's make it more sweeter than that.
Yes, it's going to be, instead of insurrection, it's resurrection.
I mean, January 6th.
I know what I'm saying. Today's January, June 30th.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, June 30th hearings.
I couldn't understand. Anyway, it's always nice to hear from devotees, and I've been hearing Devananda Pandit for, I don't know, like 40 years. And I kind of compiled a songbook of some of his songs, not all of them. But I kind of look at him as a transcendental Bob Dylan. He's been following Bob Dylan all his life, but in fact, he just played one of his tunes. But it's always interesting, I think, to find out how people came to Krishna consciousness. So, could you tell a story of how you came to Krishna consciousness? Because I've never heard it.
First of all, thank you for the honor. Before I even start, I feel it would be more appropriate for Shikshastika who would be speaking this evening, but it was already planned, so.
He's our next guest.
Shikshastika is my senior godbrother.
No, dude, you were the same age.
But you're spiritually older, much older spiritually.
No.
So anyway, there was I don't want to be too long with this, and I won't go into details. Earlier on, when Moonflower was singing, two young ladies walked in the back. It's kind of like if you've ever been in New York City feeding pigeons, sometimes they get close and then whoop, they go away. So they came in, they stuck around a little bit, and then they left. Similarly, I've had many, in a few words, how I came to Krishna consciousness is really by the mercy of the devotees, in a nutshell. Otherwise, of course, Srila Prabhupada's mercy by coming to the West. But my personal experience, is twofold. There's externally and internally. Internally, I guess I could say I had 1, 2, 3, 4, what I would call, others may call, existential crisis of faith, of knowing, which was surrounded with a lot of fear. That was the predominant emotion in those experiences. The first was at 5 years old, the one was at 14, the next one was at 19, and the last one was at 25. What saved me in the first was medication. I'm 6 years old or something. My parents took me to the hospital. They didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't explain what was going on. It was religious. Had to deal with eternity. This was going on in my mind as a kid, and I remember vividly what was going on, and I couldn't really express it. And they gave me some medication. The second one was in a church, Catholic church, as an altar boy during Holy Week. And I had a similar experience of existential crisis. Who am I? What's God? Eternity. Eternity was a big thing. And what kind of saved me from that one, I guess, was, I don't recall too well what pulled me out of that. It didn't last very long, but I think the fact that Easter came around the corner and the festivities and all that. So there are distractions. The fourth, I traveled across country, hitchhiking, jumping freight trains, and playing music. And all of a sudden it hit me. And I recall the environment was probably conducive for all of this. I was living with a lot of homeless people in a YMCA, and I was sleeping in this bunk, and I felt a ghostly experience, and also again, the word eternity, and also suicide became prevalent in my mind, and I really had a hard time pulling out of that one. And a friend pulled me out of that. I don't know, maybe 2 weeks later, after coming back across the country, going back to my home. And then, so interwoven in all of this, I had the opportunity to come in contact, not so much consciously or with interest, in devotees, in the literature, in even prasadam and service, but unknowingly. And I was just thinking when the two ladies came in, I was looking for a friend of mine, and I had heard he was frequenting the temple. This is in Canada, in Ottawa. So I decided to take my bicycle and go see if he was at the temple. We were very close. When I got to the temple, they invited me in. And it was rather strange because this was the first time I went into a temple. My first experience was with the same friend in the basement. We were 15 or 16. George Harrison came out with My Sweet Lord. My friend had a Bhagavad Gita, one of the paperback editions with Allen Ginsberg introduction and Thomas Merton. And I vaguely remember us trying to chant Hare Krishna, but we didn't know anything about it. That was my first experience. My second experience was in Ottawa when I attended university, and I saw devotees chanting on the street, and I remember taking it back to Godhead and giving a donation. Then perhaps the third experience was going to this temple, and so female devotee invited me in, and then she took me downstairs, and I thought it was strange. I guess she must have taught me. Yes. One Indian gentleman sitting on the floor with a paper plate, and this was unusual to me. And the food was unusual because I wasn't familiar with Indian food. And after taking prasadam, I went back up, and just before you go out the door, there was a curtain. And she said that the Lord are sleeping behind it, right? The deities are put to rest, they're bathed, they're fed, they're put to rest. And with my limited knowledge, it was like, okay. And then I go outside the door, and as I go outside the door, she kind of pushed me aside a little bit because there were ants. She didn't want me to step on the ants. Now here's a guy who ended up working on a cargo ship as a cook, non-vegetarian, mind you, and she's telling me not to step on the ants. And then she tells me, oh, by the way, we're going to West Virginia for a festival, if you want to come. So I'm thinking, their God is sleeping behind the curtains. She pushed me down the ants. She wanted me to hop in a van and go to West Virginia and do communes. No thanks. No? It was all a little too strange. And then I think it was afterwards, I ended up working on a ship. And then I ended up going down to South America with a girl, and you was from Chile, living in Canada. And then we trekked up to Peru. We walked the Machu Picchu Trail. And just before the trail starts, there's a town called Cusco. So we went to Cusco. Before we started, we were in Cusco and looking for something to eat. We go down this alley, and I knew there was a pizza joint there. Let's go there. And then we saw there was another place, Govinda's. Tiny little place. So I went in there, and I remember having these sweetmeats, sweet balls, and made fun of them. Because again, it was unusual for me. I made fun of the food. Coming back from South America, we landed in Miami Airport. This would have been 1980. 1980, we landed in the airport in Miami, and one of my instruments was missing, expensive, my banjo. So I was very irritated. And I was walking and someone gave me, some devotee approached me and gave me back to God. And and by the way, throughout all of this experience, I always had a Bhagavad Gita. I could never understand it. I always had a Bhagavad Gita. As a matter of fact, when I was working on the ship, one time we went out in Quebec City because the ship was being painted in the summer for a couple of weeks. And I went out with the cook. I was the assistant cook, so I went out with the cook, and we were on the street. We went out shopping, and two women devotees approached us and pinned something on us, and then asked for a donation. And I gave a donation, and they want to sell us Bhagavad Gita. And I remember saying, well, I've got one. So I encouraged the cook to buy one. So he bought one. And then we went back to the ship. The next morning we're leaving. We're out in the St. Lawrence River. And he says, I'm not feeling well. So I said, I'll go upstairs and get some seltzer. I came back downstairs, and next thing you know, we're blowing in his mouth to get him, bring him back to life, and he died. And he took the Gita the day before he passed away. In retrospect, it was like, it was something special for me. I couldn't see that then. And then so coming back from South America, the devotee gave me a Bhakti Godhead magazine, and I kept walking, and I was irritated when waiting for my instrument to show up. And then he tapped me on the shoulder, and then he asked for a donation. I guess his timing wasn't so good. I became very irritated, and I remember taking the Bhakti Godhead magazine and just throwing it in the garbage. Mm. And everything kind of started to spiral down. Krishna was taking a little special mercy here for my offense. I'm sure it wasn't just that. So I went back to college and decided to go back to college. And then this question of existentialism came around again. It's just, who am I? What is God? And suicide. So it was really an internal thing. So all of this, throughout all of this, I look back, and it took years of studying Bhagavad Gita to really pinpoint the true cause of this. And Srila Prabhupada illustrates it very nicely in his commentary in the 4th chapter, 10th verse, where he says, being free from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me, taking full refuge in me, one who's in knowledge of me, develops love for me, comes back to me. So, and fear, attachment, and anger is repeated several times in the Bhagavad Gita, in the verses themselves. And Srila Prabhupada explains the nature of this fear, that the deepest rooted fear that we have is being a person. I'm just paraphrasing. I'll have to really get some quotes on what he exactly says, but basically what he's saying is, because of our experience of going life after life, of birth, disease, old age, and death, it's not a welcoming proposal that when we become liberated, we become a person again. Because we have no conception of what it is to be a spiritual person. So therefore, we want to void out. We want to void out. We don't want to be a person. That is spiritual suicide. Of course, my immediate concerns were physical suicide, the fear of that, but also the unknown. And philosophically, I had convinced myself that there was nothing to do with it. It was my destiny. It was my destiny. So I really lost control of my mind. Another verse from the Gita. For one who's learned to control the mind is the best friend. But for one who has failed to control the mind is the greatest enemy. So I had practically lost control of my mind. And I'd gone back to college, I was trying to study philosophy and art, music, playing music. Well, I'd stopped by then. Then I went seeking different religious groups, different yoga traditions, this, that. A friend of mine, the same friend of mine, suggested, go see the Hare Krishnas. I said, oh, that was too strange for me. No way. He says, they got answers for everything. He's been around the movies his whole life, but anyway, so and then I would see, I was just a few blocks away from the temple near in college. And I remember seeing one mother in a sari with her baby. And I remember thinking, what would it be like? But I had come to a point of such emergency that it would, to take the step, I couldn't see how I could take that step. First of all, relationship with parents, that was a big issue, especially the mother. She would die if I joined the Hare Krishnas. She was a very frail woman, and I expected it would be very, very difficult, extremely difficult for her, and sure it was. And the other thing is I was married with this girl that I'd been to South America with, so trying to accommodate all this. But I was so desperate for answers. I was not eight, but from September till January, 2 hours a night sleeping, maybe. I become bones, just totally, the mind taken over, crazy mind. So, and incidentally, the woman that I saw on the street, I have a planned visit to go to Saranagati to see Devada, a friend of ours, and she and her husband live there now, and I haven't seen her since those days. Her husband and I used to travel together for a few years. That'll be interesting. So, yeah, it became such a dire experience that I committed myself to a psychiatric hospital just because I was at the temple. I went to the temple 1 week, took prasadam and felt great. I went to the class, couldn't understand anything. Went back home, and then the following week, I went to the temple on Saturday. Couldn't eat prasadam. I left. I told my wife and a friend of hers, just take me to the hospital. I gotta sleep. So the doctor said, hey, here's some medication. You can sleep. And if you have any reoccurring thoughts in the morning, call us. Well, guess what? I had a great sleep, and the first thing in the morning when I wake up, first is the reoccurring thoughts, because you reminded me of it, right? And the whole day was filled with desperation. And the next morning, I wrote a note to my former wife, took my toothbrush and my sleeping bag, went to the temple, and never looked back. And what happened at the temple, when I got there, my first the first person I approached, I said, can I help you with something? And he gave me a broom. Yeah, you could, sweep. And then I said, I need to talk to someone. And then he sent me upstairs to the office. It was a very small temple. There was 2 brahmacharis and 2 householders who had 1 child each. So there was just...
Which city was this temple?
In Ottawa, Canada. And so I went upstairs and I sat before the brahmachari, the president. And he didn't mince any words. He just set the record straight with the philosophy right away. It's like the light went on. I'm not the mind, spirit, soul. And I'm not a human being with a soul. I'm a soul with a human body. And the mind's just gone off the rails. And here's what you need to do: chant Hare Krishna. I'd been actually the week before, I had been on Haribol. But I was so disturbed, I couldn't get the full measure of it. And so I began chanting feverishly, just all day long. That's all I could do was just chant, chant, chant. So this was for many it's like, wow, this was a very drastic change, very quick change, or very dramatic in some ways. Mostly, of course, it was all internal. And you'll hear stories like that for so many. Some of them are just incredibly fascinating stories how they were saved by hairs, the width of a hair from being killed or something. And but yes, it's by the mercy of the devotees, that's for sure. But however magnificent, great the holy name is, we always have independence. We always have independence. And to take this process for granted, I'm shameful to say that I've taken it for granted so often that I can see how it's possible to just turn away from it. And again, have to be beaten, have to suffer. So to cultivate our intelligence is very important. Because if we don't learn by intelligence, then we have to learn by the school of hard knocks, which is very unfortunate. And again, it'll manifest itself in these ways. Incredible amounts of fear, great amounts of attachment, great amounts of anger, and those things become manifested beyond our control. Then we know that something needs to be addressed. And of course, it's coming together like this, chanting the holy name, taking shelter. And of course, hearing from each other's experiences. So I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone else's experience, what it's like to take this process and how we're incorporating this into our lives. Because it's a gradual thing. And well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. We'll stop here.
I'd like to thank Mukunda too for having this idea. Well, these guys.
No, this is actually the rules idea.
Okay,
I
but
shaped
you've
it
been,
and I gave it the name, that's all I did.
you've been introducing different things like the cherry on top and this and that. So that's nice. I think it increases it's not just like a drum circle where we get together and we go. But thank you very much for coming. And there's some prashadam in the back.
Yeah.
Of course.
Next month, if we can have you for this heart session.
Yeah, heroin.